Welcome to the Novel Idea Society. I'm Sam, and you technically are Max, but you are not Max.
No, I'm
Do you
not.
want to give us the backstory into your pen name and your actual name?
Yeah, I mean, I wish this was a really interesting story, but unfortunately, it's not. So I'm Jonathan Whitelaw, and I've been an author for 10 years. I just celebrated my 10th year in publishing a couple of weeks ago, start of March, I think it was. And I've only ever really written under my own name, and I'm a crime writer, mystery writer, and stuff like that. So this a Murder in Tinseltown is something of a departure from my usual kind of stuff that I write. And because it's sort of set in the 50s and it's interactive, as you guys obviously know, my publisher HarperCollins sort of decided that they might want to put a bit of distance between Jonathan Whitelaw, the author, and this, because I'm kind of, I don't want to say I'm known because that makes me sound dreadfully pretentious and arrogant, and thankfully I'm none of those things. I'll let you guys decide that maybe by the end of this evening. I like to think I'm not these things. So I got this sort of email through saying, Jonathan, we're thinking about putting this out under the name Max Nightingale. Are you okay with that? And I was like, I had like 0.3 of a second. I was a bit like, oh, and then it passed, and I was like, yes, of course. And the thing is, like Max Nightingale, that's also kind of the character that you play as well. So it's all good. Like I said, I told you it wasn't interesting.
It is interesting. So they came up with the name for you.
They did. Yeah, yeah. HarperCollins came up with it, and it's great. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's like it's sort of perfectly. It captures that sort of Humphrey Bogart, Maltese Falcon, Golden Age of Hollywood type, sleuthy, hard boiled, pulpy, all these wonderful adjectives that you can use for fiction in and around that time and movies and stuff like that in that time. So I didn't argue. So it's a lot more 50s than Jonathan Whitelaw, that's for sure.
Can we address the accent?
You can if you wish, if you want to, yeah.
So you're not born in Canada, but in
No,
Calgary.
no,
You're in Calgary
no.
though, yes?
Yeah, in 4 weeks' time, I will be an official Calgarian. I'm in Grand Prairie at the moment, up in the northwest, close to the BC border. Um, so about an hour's flight northwest from Calgary. But we move in 4 weeks. So I mean, like the blurred background isn't, it's not an aesthetic thing. It's to cover the absolute mess that our basement's in at the moment because we're getting ready to move. And we've got a 4-year-old and a 7-month-old. So it's carnage, quite frankly, and it has been carnage for a while. But no, I'm not a native Grand Prairian, as the accent somewhat dictates. So I'm originally from Glasgow, in Scotland, in the UK, and we moved over here 3 years ago this May. And I can't believe it was 3 years ago already. It feels like it was 5 minutes ago. My wife's a doctor, so she got a job up here in Grand Prairie, and she's got a new job down in Calgary, which is why we're going down to the big city. And it's been great. It's been absolutely fantastic. Everything sort of coalesced at the same time. Like I was a journalist for 12 years, and the first Bingo book, or Bingo Hall Detectives book, which is my kind of main series, that came out in the April, and we were coming over here in the May. And I'm a full-time author now, and I have been 3 years in a couple of weeks after my 3-year anniversary from my last shift as a journalist. And we've been made to feel so welcome. I've mentioned my kids there. Like one of them was born here, obviously. But Henry, who's 4, he doesn't know any different. He was only 16 months when he came over, so it's we'd never go back. Put it that way. We'd never go
Really?
back.
Oh, that's interesting. Does your wife want to come to Saskatchewan? We need doctors here.
I get that everywhere. I don't. I get it everywhere, right? And God knows what it's like whenever she goes. I did a book festival down in Lethbridge in October. I got that as well. Like it's like we need doctors in Lethbridge. We need doctors everywhere. So it's pretty awful. But she can only spend herself in one place at any given time, unfortunately.
So as a journalist, what did you primarily cover for 12 years? What was your interest as a journalist?
Everything. Quite frankly, I was online. So 99% of my career was online. I did when I first started. When I first left university, I worked in the Scottish Parliament. I was a media officer. for an MSP, a member of the Scottish Parliament. I did that for about 14 months, and I remember having this moment. There was a kind of there was a party leadership campaign contest that I was part of. My boss was running for leader,
Mhm.
and I remember having this moment, this sort of light bulb moment where I was meant to be ringing up all the newspapers to get journalists to come to the launch, and I had this kind of epiphany that I wanted to be on that side of the newsroom as opposed to on the phone. I mean, a bit of context. Obviously, I come from a kind of journalism background. Both my parents were journalists and worked in the media back in the UK for 100 years each. In front of the masked man and boy, both of them. So it was, so I always had this kind of background in it, and then uh, I did a lot of kind of freelance shifts for STV, which is the kind of Scottish national broadcaster, which was in the entertainment desk, which was wonderful because I was able to sort of read up and swat up on all the wonderful dresses and outfits that celebrities would wear on Saturday night television, which was an education. And then I joined the Sun, which is the kind of biggest tabloid newspaper in the UK, and I was there for about 10, 11 years, and I was on the online desk. They kind of moved production from London up to Glasgow. That's where I was at. And I did everything. I did everything from social media to breaking news, politics, sport, celebrity again. I did the rota, I did the budgets, I paid freelancers, I did complaints, and that could take up a whole other session of the book club. I could tell you guys stories that would make your teeth itch. Um, and I don't miss it. I miss the actually that's not true. I miss the journalism element of it. I miss going out and getting stories and writing stories and speaking to people but I don't miss all the other stuff that inevitably landed on my desk when I was for the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years of my career.
The reason I asked is if that was primarily why you were writing about crime, because often crime journalists find themselves up in crime fiction.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell me about the beginning of your journey as an author before we get into the literal choose your own adventure.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always wrote, right? I mean, I know that sounds ridiculous, but I always wrote from when I could write. And it got to that stage where, I grew up in the 1990s, and there was a dearth of sort of Star Wars media for kids, and I loved Star Wars, so I would take all my kind of X-Wings and TIE Fighters and Millennium Falcons and Han Solo action figures and stuff like that, and I'd take them on holiday with me. If my parents were taking us abroad, now these things weigh a ton, right? And my parents were paying a fortune in excess baggage. And my stepdad had this idea where he said, "We're not taking any of that this time, Jonathan. Here's a notepad and a pen. Do some doodling, drawing, do some writing, whatever." And it changed my life, quite frankly, that moment when I must have been about what, seven or eight. So what I used to do was when I was on vacation, I used to sit and write the stories that I would then play out when I got home with all my action figures and Batman and all the rest of it. Um, and that was it. Like I didn't stop writing stories, and I studied psychology at University of Glasgow, uh, and I was still writing then. The first time I kind of
What were you
properly
writing
sat down
when you
and
were
wrote.
writing? What were you writing when you were writing?
Well, this is it, right? Like the first time I actually sat down and wrote anything, like novel length was when I was about 17. So I was, in high school, senior in high school, and it was honest to goodness, it was the worst mashup of The Hobbit meets Die Hard. Um, and it's thankfully it's been lost to time. It will not be that is not a crime against art or anything like that. In fact, if anything, it's doing art a service by being lost to time. I don't know where it went. It was. I say this is how old I am, right? It was saved on CDR. So it's like, I always love sci-fi, fantasy, stuff like that, and I kind of thought that I wanted to write that, and then it wasn't really until my debut came out in 2015, and that was a sort of dark comedy about family life, and then it was after that I thought, I'd love to write some crime because I was a journalist at this point, right? And I was, and you're right, that's the thing, Sam. Unfortunately, one of the nasty sort of side effects is when you are a journalist, you come up against some pretty awful things and people and all the rest of it. And it meant that, you're kind of getting exposed to that sort of stuff. The thing is, like in Scotland, I'm sure you guys know this. In Scotland, like, there's a really, really high level of expectation when people find out you're Scottish and you write crime, because Val McDermott, Sir Ian Rankin, Christopher Brookmyre, to name three, Tartan Noir, as it's known, is world famous. But it's really gritty, and it's really dark, and kind of lacks a bit of humor at times. And I didn't really want to do that. I felt a bit of pressure, you know, almost to not do that.
Mhm.
Um, and I've always loved humor. I love Terry Pratchett books, the Discworld novels. I absolutely love those, and I always wanted to do. If I was going to do crime, if I was going to do mystery, I wanted to do it with some humor, a little bit of lightness to it. And so my main series, The Bingo Hall Detectives, that's kind of cozy crime. It's on the cozier end of crime. And this, Murder in Tinseltown, as you guys know, is a little bit edgier, but not necessarily blood and gore at every turn that the Scottish writers are world famous for.
So where did the idea for this one come from?
Oh, well, I mean, I loved these books growing up, right? I absolutely, I used to tear through these things. Absolutely love them. Any school trip, we weren't allowed to take our Game Boy or what was the Sega? I can't remember the Sega one. The color
I know what
screen.
you mean. Like any
Yeah,
handheld video game.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So and we did the phones, right? When I was, I can remember not having mobile phones or smartphones or any kind of phone. So any kind of long road trip and stuff like that, I used to have my bag was full of these things, and they were always really, really short, right? Because it was all about Dungeons and Dragons and all kinds of stuff. And I remember speaking to my wife years ago, and she said, I was a published author at this point, and she said, um, do you remember these books? Do you remember these sort of choose your own story, choose your own adventure books? Wouldn't it be great if there was a sort of adult one, a contemporary one, if that was sort of revived? And I thought, God, that's a brilliant idea. And it wasn't until maybe about a year ago, year and a half ago, um, that I was speaking to another writer friend of mine called Anthony Johnson, who's written for Marvel and video games, and he's an accomplished mystery writer himself. And we sort of spitballed this idea of doing something like this more for an adult audience. And we both went away, and we actually both ended up getting book deals on the back of our own separate sort of ideas, because my vision for it was a lot. Well, you know what my vision, you guys have read what my vision was for it, whereas his comes out in the summer, and it's quite a bit more complicated. It's got a scoring system and stuff like that. But brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And that was it. And that was the thing. I kind of floated the idea to my agent, and then it genuinely came together really, really quickly. I'd say maybe, well, I mean, that's the thing. I should kind of add the caveat at this point that like the publishing industry is so slow, and that's like everybody says that, right? Like, it's not just because I'm a journalist and your deadline was yesterday, or you don't have a deadline. That's how soon it needs to be. Um, but it's really, really slow. And this all came to like, I'd written the proposal for it, written a couple of sample chapters with options. And my agent had it out on submission within about 10 days. And then it was snapped up it was bought by my current publisher, which was sort of convenient as well for kind of release times, within maybe about 2 months, or a month and a half. And that's unheard of with this kind of thing, because it is so slow. It's such a slow industry. But the caveat was that they wanted it out in the UK for Christmas. So Christmas just gone there in January here. So that meant that I had about 5 months to write it. Well, not just 5 months to write it, but 5 months to write it, do the drafts, do the edits, make sure it all made sense and stuff like that. So it was a pretty busy summer last year.
No pressure, hey?
Absolutely, yeah. But it's the gig.
So talk to me about your characters. Are they based like so when you wrote the proposal, I guess let's start with the proposal. Did you start with Tinseltown, Hollywood, Golden Age? Like, is that where you started with it, or how much of the actual story was in the proposal?
Yeah, so I've always wanted to do a story kind of set there, and like when you write a series, when you write a kind of mystery series, you're always, yeah, well, my kind of main mystery series is set contemporary, in the 2020s in Cumbria, which is a region in the UK. Um, so there was no way of ever transporting these characters back to 1958. So I kind of harbored this idea of doing something in that kind of golden age of Hollywood, that sort of late golden age of Hollywood for a while, because I love the visuals of that era. I love how, you watch the old Oscar ceremonies and, the style and the how people speak and stuff like that, and just the world really. That is, for me, that's what Hollywood is, and that's what Hollywood always will be. So having the kind of opportunity, like when this idea kind of came up, and because we were moving so quickly, I thought, why don't we set it then? Because the kind of, the mechanics of doing something like this, it's very, very difficult to try and factor in real world, like modern times, things like phones, right?
Hmm.
Like I know how difficult it is
Taking
to write.
phones out of it makes
Exactly, right? So you
complicates it
get
significantly less. Yeah.
precisely that. And like that's, modern mystery writers, modern crime writers, all we do is spend our time, if you're writing in 2025, all we do is spend our time trying to work out why people wouldn't just use the GPS on their phone, or, use their phone for an app to solve the crime, right? So, it was such a lovely luxury to kind of be transported back, 60, 70 years, and to just not have that as a worry. So yeah, so it kind of lent itself really, really well to that, and I'd always wanted to do it. And yeah, it genuinely felt like the kind of stars just lined up for it, and my agent went for it, and obviously the kind of publishers went for it too, which was great, which was awesome.
Did you base them on any actual historical characters?
Yes and no. Yes and no. So kind of Blanche Aikerman is that sort of Marilyn Monroe type character. You've got Von Hiltz obviously is that that sort of stereotypical shouting director from way back, with the Jod person, stuff like that. It's very, very much kind of in that style. And the thing about doing something like this, because because of when it's set, and also the kind of nature of what it is as a book, you I I was essentially turned loose on having these slightly over the top characters that maybe adhere to more, dare I say it, stereotypical kind of images and stuff like that, because you've got such a small amount of room to work with, to craft the mystery, to keep it going. Whereas, if I'm writing something that's maybe, um, like a standard mystery, you get a lot more time to explore who these characters are and who's behind these stereotypes and stuff like that. But because the kind of nature of something like this is, use the reader, or use the reader have to solve it. You've got a relatively small sandbox to play in, so everything's got to pop, to use Hollywood parlance.
When you are writing your more standard books, do you plot or do you fly by the seat of your pants?
Oh man, the age-old question, right? So I teach mystery fiction for the Alexandra Writers Centre here in Alberta, no down in Calgary. And I always say this. There's a kind of session that I do on plotting and pantsing, and I always say that, uh, while I would love to think that it all just comes off the top of my head, and I can deal with the anarchy of not having everything plotted out, I think inherently, crime writers have to do at least some plotting, because at the very least, before you start writing anything, you have to know who done it, right? You have to know who the killer is, or you have to know who the thief is, or you have to have at least some vague idea as to who they actually are. Their relationship with everybody else and stuff like that. That can change. That can change on a dime, but you kind of need to know who's responsible for it. So there's always an element of planning. I used to pants a lot more than I do now. So what I tend to work from, and it was the same with this book actually. What I tend to work from is like a two-page synopsis, like a two-page roadmap, no more than 2 pages, and it's just hitting all the beats of what the plot is. Um, but that's for my sanity, because like when I get
Efficiency.
halfway through writing a manuscript, I trust past Jonathan that he knew exactly what he was talking about, so I can go back to the roadmap, read it, and go, "Oh, right, okay, that's what this book's all about, right?" Um, I've usually strayed so far from it, it's unsalvageable, but sometimes I can get it back and stuff. So that kind of helps. Yeah, and I couldn't not do it now. I couldn't not have that roadmap. I've become completely reliant on it.
With this book, though,
Yeah.
there's no like there's no straight line start to finish. So how do you even plot out a book like this? Let alone like plotting out a book like this, but then laying out a book like this. How does
Yeah.
that even happen?
It was yeah. That was the unfortunate thing about everything going so quickly, was that I didn't actually think about having to do it until it was all the contracts were signed and stuff like that, and the deadline was looming. So I made a big mistake, right? And I don't mind admitting this. Like, I made a huge mistake at the start. So what I did was I I I tried to write all the threads at once. So if you can imagine it being like the roots of a tree. So you've got the kind of trunk of the tree, the grass or the ground, and then all the roots sort of spread out underneath. And these are like the story threads, right? The different story threads throughout it. So I was writing, I was going between threads to try and tie them all up as I wrote them. And it severely hindered my progress, because like I like to write maybe anywhere between 1,500 and 2,500 words a day. That's what I'll sit down and do when I'm writing one of my kind of normal mysteries. And doing it this way, starting it this way, I was lucky if I was breaking 300 words.
Oh
So
wow.
significantly less than what, and that was kind of getting me down. And I sort of persevered with this for about 4 weeks, 3, 4 weeks. And it got to the stage where like it was just becoming untenable, and worst of all, it wasn't making sense. Right? That was I was going nowhere slowly. So I took a break. I took maybe about 10 days off, and I came back to it with a completely different approach. And what I thought was, right, well, what if this was like a normal mystery book that I write? How would I do it? So I took, arguably what the main thread of Tinseltown is, and I just wrote that. I wrote it like I would write any other mystery novel, and it came in at about 25,000 words. And I had a word limit of 50,000 words. The 55,000 words, the publisher were adamant that they didn't want any longer than that. So having that sort of core, having that sort of spine of the story was a total game changer, because suddenly whatever I wrote around it, I had a place to tie it back in and branch off and things like that. And I could always bring it back to what I thought, or what I believe is the main vein of what the book is. And I it went from like 300-400 words, 300-400 words a day, to back to like 1,500 words. And then bless my editors, I had two editors this time. I've never had two editors in a book before. It's always just been the one. And they got, I think it was maybe about 6 or 7 Word documents with all the different threads, and like, insert this thread here in certain points, because I mapped out all the different choices and stuff. And honestly, how they brought it together, I will never know. I mean, editors are magicians at they're magicians at the very best of times, but these two are proper kind of, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry wizards. Um, and that was it. And then like, and the weird thing was, like, we worked from these documents, for weeks. And then literally kind of overnight, I got this PDF, this proof PDF of what it was going to look like finally. And it went from all these loads and loads of documents, so having all these edits done to it, to just this one document, and it all kind of made sense. And I had to go through it with a fine tooth comb and stuff like that. So yeah, it was a very, very different experience.
Would you do it again?
Oh no, don't ask me that. Don't ask me that. Don't ask me that. So
No.
this is the thing, right? This is the thing. I've never written something where I flipped and flopped between that question so much.
Oh
It's never
really?
ever come up. Yeah, it's never ever come up. It's not. It's never come up. It's not. I've never been so undecided, because there's been moments where I've thought to myself, do you know what? I'm desperate to do another one, because it's been so liberating to be able to explore all these different threads. And then there were other times where it was like, what have I talked myself into here? Like, this is an absolute nightmare. And weirdly, it wasn't until like so I kind of handed in the draft, or the first draft, or the final, well, the first draft for the editor in the first week in August last year. And then I had to go straight on to another book that I was writing, because that was coming out in February in the UK. So I had a deadline of sort of, October, November time for that. And that was one of my, one of the sort of classic, like a classic mystery sort of, one story. And I felt really, really confined by only telling one story, because it was like, with the choose your own adventure stuff, you can explore all these different, it's proper kind of, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. You can get all these variants, and you can see where your imagination might take you to different points of it. And then to suddenly just have to be able to tell one of those stories, I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm claustrophobic here. I feel like I'm trapped in a box. So I was all for doing another one then. But I'm back to being undecided.
So talk to me about the spine, because there were so many times that I thought I was almost done. And then it was like, you're not done. And I was not going to read it twice, because by the end of it, I was like, I think I got to the end. So tell me if I got the spine right. So is it that her mom killed her?
It is. It
Okay.
is. It
I
is.
was like, because then I kind of flipped through the back of the book and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
saw
yeah.
Walter, and I'm like, who's Walter? And I was like, I don't care enough to go through the book to figure out where Walter comes into it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
what's the other storyline, if you can tell me?
So there's a couple of other storylines, right? So there's a gangster storyline where you get involved with a Boffy, who's a sort of gangster's moll. And she's sort of pseudo tied in with the award ceremony that's meant to be happening, the next night. Walter, Mr. Walter, he's the hotel manager, and he's got a gambling addiction. So he's stealing like awards trophies and money and things like that from the hotel. So he's up to something. Um, Von Hiltz kind of follows the main thread of it, but there's a couple of threads where Von Hiltz is the killer, or is a killer, sorry, and kills you a couple of times,
I
and
got one
then
of those.
him is killed.
Yeah, I
Um,
had that one.
so, and who else is there? There's the movie executive as well, that kind of again kind of ties into a couple. He ties in with the gangsters, and Walter ties in with the gangsters, but then some of them don't tie. So yeah, that's the. And then I mean, you get killed loads and loads of times. That was the fun bit, right? You can get killed from the first option. I seem to recall.
Uh, I found it like almost frustrating, because I'm someone who watches a lot of like true crime TV and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
Law and Order and those kinds of
yeah.
things. And I was like, I can follow a plot. And then I'd be dead. And I was like, maybe I can't follow a plot. And so, because even when I'm reading thrillers
Yeah,
or like whodunits, I really pride myself on like when I figured out who the person was. And
yeah, yeah,
I'll be like, on this page, I knew it was this
yeah,
person.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
in this one, I was like, I'm dead again, or like the story ends for you here, or you can go back and try
yeah, yeah,
again. And I was like, well, obviously, this is not the ending if the suggestion is to go back and try again. Have you gone through it and read it since it's come out?
Well, I read it so many times. I mean, this is the thing, right? Like when when you've got a big publisher like HarperCollins, like
Yeah,
you read the thing to death, quite
right.
frankly, and it does get to that stage. I've never been this extreme, but I do know a lot of other writers who get to the stage where they literally they don't ever want to read it ever again in their life, because they've read it and reread it and reread it and read it. And the problem with this is, like, my wife's my first editor, right? She reads everything that I write. She reads it first, and she said, Jonathan, the only shame that the only pity with this particular book is that I'll never be able to sit and read it like
The way
like
a reader
readers will be able to
would.
read it, because she knew all the ins and outs of it. She was never able to read it as a completed thing. Whereas, like, edits can be made to normal mysteries and stuff like that, and she'll get to read it once it comes out, and she'll say, all right, well, that's been changed and stuff. So, that was the kind of downside of it. So, yeah, and the thing with this one is that I had to be careful, because, you know, I didn't want to be reading it and rereading it and anticipating what happens if you went down a particular route, because then you might start to miss stuff and then things don't get tied up. And so, the thing about these types of books though are that they always leave that little bit of room for frustration, because I think that's what made them so popular. It's why I always read them, right? Because I never got them right. I never ever got them right. I wasn't clever enough to get them right. So I would end up reading them 1,000 times, and still, and for the most part, I still don't know to this day. Don't know if I ever got to the kind of proper conclusion. But that maybe I'm just a sadist. Maybe I just really really liked being frustrated in that sense.
I want to open it up to the room.
Certainly.
Do you guys have questions before I turn the camera around? Yes? Questions? Questions? I'm going to turn the camera around and I'm going to put
Oh,
them on
wow.
the spot. There
Hi,
are
everybody.
people. See, there are
Hi.
people here. If you have a question, you will have to come closer because he won't be able to hear you, or I can repeat it. Questions?
No pressure.
Yeah, come up closer so he can hear you.
Sure, I don't know.
You don't have to. There you
Do I
go.
have to?
No. Can you hear him? Can you hear
There
him?
we go.
I can, and loud and clear.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, he can hear you.
I probably grew up a bit earlier than what you're describing, so I would have been in the 80s reading Choose Your Own Adventure books. There was a whole bunch of things coming out of the UK that were more like game books, and you actually had
Yeah.
dice that you were rolling. And
Yep.
and now middle-aged guys like me are trying to recapture that magic. How we collect these things.
Yes.
I go into used bookstores and I'm collecting stuff. So I have a great fondness for the format, and just had a great time. I don't have a question. Actually, I do have a question. Might Von Hilt have been run over by a car, but then shows up later? I don't know. There was something weird and dreamlike that happened. I thought there was a character who got run over by a car at the airport,
Yep.
but then he shows up later as well.
Yeah.
And that was intentionally surreal. And
Yeah.
these characters are just kind of archetypes that kind of weave in and out of the story, and maybe not fully
Absolutely.
rational ways.
Absolutely, and this is, this is one of the things that happens when you deal with all these alternates and variants and things like that, is that it's all part of kind of muddying the water, and that, weirdly, that was one of the hardest things that I had, because when you write mysteries, when you write whodunits, the whole shtick is that it ties completely together, right? And I teach this in my classes. I always say, as a journalist, you always want to answer the questions who, what, where, why, and when, and if possible, how. And I always say that in my classes when you're writing mystery. If you can get to the end of your manuscript, get to the end of your mystery story, and you can answer all of these questions, who, what, where, why, and when, then chances are it's gonna make sense, right? It's gonna tie up neatly. You might have to tinker with things in the edit and stuff like that, but if you can answer all those questions, who, what, where, why, and when, and it still makes sense, and it makes absolute sense, then it's gonna work. And with this, that goes completely out the window. Right? It goes completely out the window, because you've got so many different alternates, and you've got places where people have got to be that then tie in with other parts of it, and then depending on what route you've gone down, that you see someone get run over, but then you have to go back a couple of steps to a point where they've not been run over and something else is happening, and you're introducing other characters and stuff like that. So it becomes, like I said, my editors, God bless them, they were I imagine they were sweating bullets every time an edit came through. And none of that I factored in when I decided I wanted to do something like this. And it was only when you start writing it and you realize, blimey, this is all got to weave together in a way that at least you get some conclusion from it, and people don't think that it's unnecessarily confusing or too confusing and stuff. And what's interesting is that, and I've noticed this actually since it came out, there are very, very different audiences for these types of books to, what you would say a regular mystery. because there are so many different alternative views and alternative ways to solve it, and get to a solving that isn't necessarily, you know, the actual solving of the mystery. Because it depends at what point how frustrated you can get with it, and where your sort of level of not wanting to go back and find out if that was different. You know, just we were talking about earlier on. So it means that, you know, it is always a lot more open-ended as a narrative. And by the way, I'm exactly the same, and I was exactly the same, and that's partly why I wanted to do something like this, because like video games came along, and they sort of spelled the end, the sort of death knell for these types of books, because you started getting video games that had different endings depending on what route you went, but it was a lot more interactive, and you didn't have to read it because you just press buttons and stuff like that. And you know, one of the things that we talked about my editors, my agent and stuff, was that kind of nostalgia factor with something like this. In that, you know, the generations that enjoyed these books the first time around, we're now at that stage where we can enjoy them, but to our tastes and our what we want to read and how we want to read them and how they're you know, how they're displayed, they've matured along with us. And not that I'm mature, so I still think I'm 15 years old, still behave like I'm 15 years old. But that's a different matter. So yeah, that kind of nostalgia part of it has been a big part of the kind of drive behind doing something like this. And listen, I'm no different. I see this in my classes and stuff, and events like this. You know, writers, we're all readers first and foremost, voracious readers first and foremost. And like, I missed these books. I really did. I missed reading them. I missed having that freedom of going down all these different routes and getting totally frustrated and then elated if I got anywhere near an ending. So yeah, it's meant to be good fun, right? Hopefully it's good fun.
Anybody else?
Hello.
Hi.
How are you? Can you see me?
I can see your
step forward
hand.
a little bit more. Oh, and
Hi.
step back. And a little more this way. There you go.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I hope I'm brighter than the light.
Yeah, you're
I
good.
hope you can see me.
Yeah, you're good.
Absolutely.
Anyways, I just want to ask you about the name that you go by. Is it the exact name of the book?
Max
He missed the
Nightingale, yeah,
beginning.
yeah. So Jonathan Whitelaw is that's my actual name, and that's what all my other books are under. But Max Nightingale's just for this book.
Yeah, I want to ask you something. As far as writing novels, have you ever been approached by movie directors and producers to convert your books into like movies or maybe plays?
The short answer is yes, but I'm not allowed to talk an awful lot about it.
Good question.
And last
Fantastic
part,
question. Fantastic question. Yeah, so there are two production companies at the moment in the UK that are circling my other series, my Bingo Hall Detective series for TV, and one of them is also interested in this. And the kind of proposals that they've put forward for it, it would be a straight story, and we would try and weave in as much of the kind of alternative stuff as we could. And they're also talking about possibly setting it at Christmas, which would be very, very different to what it is just now. But it's, yeah, I'm not a great question. Listen, the best questions are the ones that I'm not allowed to answer, right? That's my journalism days.
but the reason why I ask is because you seem very popular with the books that you write, the novels and stuff
Very
like
kind
that.
of you.
So, last question, I just want to ask you, with the creativity that you have in writing the novels that you do, what's your incentive? Do you want to revolutionize novels, or do you just want to stick to just the process and seeing how it unfolds?
Great question. Fantastic question. I mean, I think, you know, writers write, and you know, one of my core mantras for being a writer has always been that I love to tell stories and I love to read stories, right? You know, just as we talked about there, I don't know any writer that doesn't read constantly. And you know, the sort of classic the classic writer's trope is that, you know, write the book that you'd want to read. And I think I do that to a certain degree. I think with this book in particular, like, you know, I would never, you know, I'd never be arrogant or you know, so such a stuffed shirt to think that what I'd ever written would ever, you know, would ever change an industry or anything like that, right? Because I don't know any writer that kind of sets out to do something like that. If it happens, wonderful. Do you know what it reminds me, actually? It reminds me of a story. I did a book festival in Shetland, in Scotland 2 years ago now. And it's a little island, it's about 12 hours. It's a 12-hour ferry journey from the mainland of the UK in the middle of the North Sea. And it was in the kind of capital of it, Lerwick. It's a tiny little town, and it's so tiny that on Sundays everything's closed. And I needed a break from the festival because it was held in this sort of one auditorium. So I went for a walk, and as I was walking down this one street of the town, this lady was approaching me, and as I passed her, I'd done a panel earlier on that morning with another couple of writers, and as I walked past her, she said, "Oh, Jonathan, really enjoyed your panel this morning." Now I didn't know this lady, right? I didn't know her. She had an Australian accent, and I said, "That's very kind of you. Thank you. You enjoying the festival and stuff like that?" She said, "Yes." We got chatting. And she said, you know, I'm originally from Melbourne, but my dad passed last year, and he loved crime fiction, he loved whodunits, he loved mystery, and he left me a little bit of money. So what I've been doing is I've been doing the things that I think he would have really enjoyed. So that's why she'd made you know, literally the other side of the world to go to this book festival from Melbourne, Australia to Shetland in the UK. And she said to me, she said, he really would have enjoyed your books, Jonathan, because it was right up, you know, right up his street, exactly his sort of taste. And I wish he'd been here to see it because I really enjoyed, you know, hearing you talk about it. And I said to her, I said, look, I'm gonna stop you there, right? I'm gonna stop you there because if you don't stop, I'm gonna burst out crying. Because when you sit down and you start writing stuff as a writer, you never ever think and ever dream that you could have that kind of impact on anyone, right? You know, like I'm still at that stage where I'm grateful to all you guys that you're even here tonight, let alone read the book, let alone enjoyed it, let alone anything else. And to hear a reader go out of our way to tell me this story about, you know, very personal story about our late father. It was such a privilege, right? It was such a privilege, and there's been a couple of times where I've had sort of experiences like that as a writer, and you never ever set out to do something like that, right? You know, well, I certainly don't anyway. And when you get an experience like that with readers and getting to speak to people about, and they're talking about your work, I mean, it really is second to none, and so special, and I'm so grateful for it, you know?
Yeah, last question. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay, no, not at all.
I'm an author. I wrote 3 books. They're not novels. One is called The Path to Peace and Never-Ending Struggle. The other one is called The National Destiny View. And the other one is called Ancestral Motivation. So anyways, I'm not trying to sell you guys on anything. I just want to ask you last thing though. As for me, when I write, I always focus on the emotional output.
Yeah.
My question to you is, when you do write, what is the experience when you write? Do you focus on your emotional outlet or rational outlet? And if you, let's say, write rationally and using your brain instead of your emotions, do you experience any writing blocks as opposed to when you write emotionally and
Oh yeah.
your writing is just very seamlessly?
Yeah, it's do you know that's the weird thing about being a full-time author now is that I actually find it harder than it was when I was working 8, 9, 10 hour shifts 8 days a week and writing when I came home or writing before I went to work. Because I always think that writing's a craft and it's a bit like running the mile. I always say this, you know, you would never run the Boston Marathon without at least doing, you know, a year's worth of prep before it. There's an argument to be made that even with all the prep in the world, I still wouldn't be able to run the Boston Marathon. But again, that's a different issue. So, you know, when I was a journalist, I was doing 8, 9, 10 hour shifts of writing. You know, it wasn't fiction. I promise you it wasn't fiction, right? But you know, you know, the kind of muscle memory of actually sitting down and writing stories, you know, with start, middle, and ends and stuff like that. Like that was my warm up, so that when I went home, I could hit the ground running, so to speak. But I don't have that outlet anymore. You know, my 8, 9, 10 hours of writing a day are all my fiction now. So it's been a bit of an adjustment. But in terms of like your question, you know, do I write emotionally, or do I write, you know, kind of, do I kind of stress the emotion? It really depends. It depends on the work, right? It depends. When you write mystery, you know, I always say this about mystery fiction: we have a ready-made story arc that you don't maybe have in other genre fiction or literary fiction. You know, our ready-made story arc as mystery writers are: the crime's committed, there's an investigation, and then there's some sort of resolution. So we get the kind of long end of the broom in that respect, that's the sort of set formula that mystery writers adhere to. Of course, you can move things about and, you know, you combine things. With my other series, we're 4 books into it now. So what you tend to find is the characters come with a lot more baggage than they did when in the first book, because you spend a lot of the first book introducing who these characters are. And, you know, rather than an introduction to them, you're evolving those characters up. So I reckon actually probably sort of books 4, 3, and 4 in this series are maybe a little bit more emotional in terms of the perspective of the characters that involve the sort of 2 lead detectives than say the first ones were, because you're setting up the world, and it's a very, very different prospect as a writer to do that. The other thing with the series is that, you know, it's a cozy mystery, which means that my 2 detectives are amateurs. You know, they're not cops, and you have to get their motivation down. Like in the first book, and I always say this about cozy mystery, right? The great thing is that it's kind of rooted in real life. So the detectives are people like us, right? You know, they're ordinary people. They're run of the mill people. But of course, the absolute last, I don't know about you guys, but the last thing that I would do is if I opened up my front door and there was a body lying there with a knife in the chest, the last thing I want to do is go and try and catch the killer. The first thing I do is ring 911 and get the cops on the case, right? But that never ever happens in cozy crime. It never ever happens in cozy crime. So, you know, the first book you can kind of get away with it, but the second and third and fourth time, you know, you really have to nail down that motivation as to why these rank amateurs are still putting themselves in danger, mortal danger, to catch the baddies when there's a perfectly competent police force there. So so that, you know, I know that it's become much more of a stress on the sort of emotional side of the characters and who these characters are and their relationships with each other and stuff, as opposed to, you know, they're just the kind of mechanics that tell the story. With something like this, with something like Tinseltown, you know, you don't, as I said earlier on, I didn't have an awful lot of room to maneuver. You know, first and foremost, it was 40,000 words shorter than my normal books. You know, so from like from an actual word count point of view, there wasn't as much room, and also because the stress is more on the fun of choosing your own story throughout it. Again, he says fun. You know, everything had to be a bit bigger. Everything had to be a bit more in your face and less, you know, less subtle than maybe my other writing. But it was good fun to do. It was great to do differently, right? Because I'd never written anything like that before. And I always like to challenge myself as a writer, because I think if you don't challenge yourself, don't continue to challenge yourself as a writer, then that's when complacency sets in. And we've all been there, right? We've all read the 15th book in a series, very, very popular series, and it feels like the author's just dialing it in. You know, it's just paint by numbers stuff. And I don't think any author ever sets out to do that, but it's very, very easy to fall into. And I think at the stage that I'm at with my career, doing something like Tinseltown was a proper jolt in the arm to go, you know what, you know, if you'd carried on writing another bingo book, for example, then it might have you might have just gotten that it's like the groove in the sofa, right? It's the groove in the couch where you're watching TV. It just becomes so comfortable that you never ever want to move. It's the same with writing. If that's not too clumsy an image.
Coming back to
Oh, I'm
me.
getting dizzy. Oh.
Sorry. Okay, we're getting close to the end of the night here. What do you read? What is your, for pleasure, not for like professional
Okay.
development and those kind of things, but what do you read for fun?
So I'm on a bit of a non-fiction binge at the moment. So the last vestiges of my journalism are review work. So I still do a lot of review work, and I get sent a lot of fiction, crime fiction, mystery fiction, any kind of fiction actually. So I still get to do a little bit of journalism in that respect. And I get other authors who send me books. The fools think that my opinion's worth anything, and they send me books early to say, Jonathan, what do you think of this? Would you say something nice about it? So I never say no, right? But I'm on a bit of a non-fiction binge at the moment from when I'm not doing all that stuff. So I just finished Emperor of Rome by Mary Beard, and I think she's a Cambridge professor, Cambridge Dawn. She's a TV personality and stuff like that as well in the UK. Expert in ancient Rome, and that's really really good. That I love all that. I love, and she's a wonderful writer because she kind of sometimes with kind of ancient history and actually non-fiction in general, it can be quite dry, it can be quite drab, it can be kind of textbooky. Whereas Mary Beard is such a wonderful writer that she genuinely it feels like a fiction prose the way that she writes. And I'm also reading. I've just started actually the third volume of Sir Michael Palin's diaries. So Monty Python's Sir Michael Palin. He's had his diaries sort of published in 10-year blocks. I'm on the third one of those, which is when he started becoming like a sort of travel writer, travel TV presenter. And that's really good as well because I've been a big fan of his work. I grew up watching Monty Python on late night TV and find it hilarious and stuff like that, and him in particular. And I watched his documentaries, travel documentaries as well. So getting to read his diaries it's like I've never been much of a sort of diarist or memoir reader, but reading the diaries of someone that everybody seems to know and love and stuff like that, and actually finding out that he has all these anxieties about TV shows and films and stuff, it's great. It's great to see it warts and all, right? It's great to see that there's a human being behind the human being, right? So it's so that's what I've just started maybe about a quarter of the way through that at the moment. But yeah, big non-fiction. I love my non-fiction. Sport as well. I finished a couple of months ago a book about the Battle of Alberta between the Oilers and the Flames. We're big Oilers fans, and weirdly have been since before we came over to Canada, and then we lived 3 blocks away from Rogers Place. And as soon as I get off this call, I'm going to go up and watch them play Dallas, which is so it's perfect, right?
It's brave that you're moving to Calgary, though.
Oh, well, this is the thing. If I wanted the
Just-
Oilers license plate, and then thank God I didn't do it, right? Because I'd be paying for new windshields and windows every week.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know it's that bad, but
I'm gonna have to. Well, this is the thing. I grew up in Glasgow, right? And of course, the big rival, the sports rival, there's Celtic and Rangers, the soccer, and that does get to that level, right? Managers of one team aren't allowed to have cars in the color of the other team. That's how petty it gets. I've got an Oilers keyring on my car keys that I'll keep just to keep myself honest, and I'll keep all my jerseys and things like that weirdly, I was talking to my wife earlier on today. My oldest son goes to school next year. And of course you get wear your jersey to school day for charity and stuff like that. And I said, are they gonna go into school wearing their Oilers jerseys? And my wife said, only if you want them to come back with black eyes and burst lips and stuff. So we'll maybe stick to the soccer side of things when it comes to that.
that's so great. Okay, what are you working on now? Because you're a full-time author, there's no days
I
off.
am. Yeah. Yeah. So I've got something Canadian in the works, which has been very, very exciting to work on. So that's with my agent at the moment. And I can't really talk about it at the moment. But it's my first sort of Canadian set in the prairies. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. It's a
Okay,
little bit.
it's a mystery. You can tell me.
Yeah, I can tell you. It's a mystery how I even got this far, quite frankly. But that's this far in life. But yeah, it's something a little bit edgier than my other stuff, and it's set in the prairies. And I'm very, very excited about it. It was really, really good fun to write. Really, really good fun to write, and something completely new for me. And I'm
Is
also
it under
working.
your name? Is it a Whitelaw
Well,
book?
I don't know yet. I don't know yet. I don't. It's
Oh.
not. It's only out in submission at the moment. So that's. So I'd like it to be. I'd like it to be because I am, as you guys can tell by now, a complete egomaniac, and can't go 5 minutes without my name being mentioned. But I'm working on something. I'm about halfway through a manuscript first draft at the moment of something that probably won't see the light of day until next year. Just because of timelines and stuff like that, and other stuff that I've got lined up for the rest of the year. So yeah, There's always, it's always nice. Listen, it's a nice problem to have, right? You know, it's good fun. It's such a privilege to be able to do something like this. It's what I've always wanted to do. I'll tell you a very quick story. Actually, I was over in London, England, last year, start of last year, yeah, about a year ago. And I was in a cab going to Heathrow Airport to come home, and I got chatting to the cab driver, and he said, you know, what are you over for? Are you over for, you know, are you down from Scotland? I said, no, I live in Canada. And he said, what are you over for work? And I said, yeah, I'm an author. And he went, all right, have you always done that? And I said, no, I used to be a journalist. And he said, so what you're trying to tell me, Jonathan, is that you've never worked a day in your life. And I was a bit like, do you know something? Yeah, that's you've hit the nail on the head with that, because it's yeah, as we talked about earlier, I absolutely love journalism, love being a journalist, and love being an author, and it's been really it's been pretty cool.
It is funny how it, as stressful and bonkers as the industry is, it doesn't feel like work.
Absolutely,
Which,
absolutely.
like, don't tell my boss that.
No, well, that's it, right? This is going out live at the lab. But yeah, it's, you know, you get, as a journalist, you get to meet so many interesting people, and you get to see the absolute best of life and the absolute worst of life. And you know, I said that weirdly, I said that exact same thing. I had to give a leaver speech. I thought I was getting away with it, right? A lot of people had left the team in the sort of lead up to me leaving, just through, you know, various, you know, post-COVID things and stuff like that. And I thought it was kind of, the clock was ticking nearer and nearer to the end of the end of my last shift, and it didn't look like someone was going to do, you know, the kind of the leaver speech. And I was all for that, because I don't like that sort of thing. Anyway, my editor got up just as I was pulling my jacket on, and he gave this speech, and then he started to well up, and I started to well up as well, because I'd known, you know, we'd worked together for 10, 11 years. And I said that, weirdly, I said that in my leaver speech. I said that some of my absolute fondest memories for all time were in that newsroom, and some of my absolute worst memories of all time were in that newsroom. And weirdly, there are a couple of occasions where they were only an hour apart.
Or
if that.
seconds.
Or
Seconds
seconds.
even.
Right. But it's a really, I would never ever discourage anyone from going into it as an industry. It's a very special role, very special job, very important as well, right? Maybe even more important than it's ever been now. And I do miss a big chunks of it. I don't know if the industry misses me. I doubt it. I doubt that severely, but that's
We do.
it's a different issue.
Every time one leaves, we all lose a little piece.
Oh, very kind of you. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you so much for coming tonight and for sharing this with us. What a wild ride this book was, and not only to read, but to hear how it all came together. And good luck with the next project. And you have my info, so stay in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out on a Wednesday night, isn't it? Yeah, Wednesday night, and just as spring's about to sprung, as they say. But no, listen, an absolute pleasure. Lovely to meet you guys, and thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the book.
We did. Stay in touch. Take care.
See you later, guys. Bye-bye.